Okay, so back to power-oriented killers. This was the first psychological type that we were talking about. And we left off talking about BTK. So Ted Bundy, I know you guys have heard his name before. Certainly I've mentioned him. Ted Bundy was he's the serial killer in America that's gotten the most press. He started in the 1970s. So, a long time ago, before a lot of you guys were even born. So he was a sexual sadist. He started out in the Seattle area and then moved his way through these other states that are mentioned. He's the prime example of how serial killers unfortunately don't look creepy and gross, so we can pick them out. Okay, and I know when you look at pictures of Ted, he doesn't look like he's that attractive. Okay, because a lot of them are shots from prison. If any of you have seen the Ted Bundy movie on Netflix that starred Zac Efron, I was amazed at how much Zac Efron resembled Ted Bundy. And Zac Efron is a great looking guy, okay? So Ted Bundy was really attractive. And guess what? He was charismatic. He was charming. He was also not stupid at all. He was college educated. He became a law student. His big way to lure in women, young women, he would use a fake arm cast. And then he would be carrying all these books, because he was a law student. He would ask them for help. And I think most people, they see someone who's having a rough time, whether they have a leg cast or an arm cast, if asked for help, they're probably going to help them. And so he would have these young women carry books. And then he would say, oh, you can just put it in the front seat of my, my car. And when they opened up the front seat, they would notice, that's weird, there's no front seat. Well, the front seat was removed for a reason. And before they could have that, realize the impact of that, he would hit them in the head, make them, unconscious due to blunt force trauma to the head, and then off he would go. He also impersonated police officers. This is one thing I want to point out that I mentioned before. Ted Bundy started out as a peeping Tom. So he was a voyeur, and so that's why I say peeping Toms may just be peeping Toms, and, hopefully they, grow out of that behavior, but sometimes they don't, and it's a starting point. So something for you in law enforcement, not that you become obsessed with it, but, maybe just, oh, that's a potential red flag. I might want to keep an eye on this person. Ted Bundy was also the reason why the current DNA database, which is called CODIS, was developed. And in fact, when I was in graduate school, I was lucky enough to do an internship at the FBI lab in Quantico. And they would take us out to, just want to show you who's helping me with my lecture today. They would take us out to hear various speakers, from the Bureau. And one of them, at that time, it was the acting director, and he was talking about the implementation of the CODIS database, which was absolutely new to us because DNA was still in its infancy. But he said there are 3 words to describe why this database was developed: Theodore Robert Bundy. And it's because Ted Bundy, he was a sexual sadist, so he left DNA in the form of semen evidence behind, but he started out in Seattle, Washington, and then he moved to Utah to go to law school, and then he went up to Colorado, and then he went to Florida. And so he was leaving DNA evidence behind at all these different scenes. However, is, a law enforcement agency from a county in Colorado going to, reach out randomly to all of, every single jurisdiction or agency in the country to say, hey, do you have any matching cases? No. It's not that they don't want to, but they don't have the resources and the time. And so CODIS allows DNA profiles to be put in. And even if you don't know the name of the person who the DNA belongs to, you know that certain offenses are being committed by the same person. And that allows investigative leads to be developed. So, the police in Seattle can call the place in Colorado and say, hey, we got the same guy operating in both of our jurisdictions. What do we have in common? So that's really the beauty of CODIS, and it was developed because of Ted. So Ted, his trademark behavior was he chose victims who resembled his ex-girlfriend. Okay, and here she is right here. I've heard different names, but I believe her name was Stephanie. I could be wrong on that. But the problem with Stephanie is Stephanie dug deeper and did determine that something's not right with Ted. I don't want to be with him any longer, and so she dumped him. And for a narcissist, that's unacceptable, right? Because he is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Women don't dump Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy gets to dump women. So how dare she? So, obviously filled with rage against this ex-girlfriend, but smart enough to know if I go kill her, the cops are going to come looking for me because there's a relationship there. So instead, I'm going to select random young women, either by stalking them or by crimes of opportunity. I'm going to kill and murder them and take all my rage on them. And it's like I'm killing Stephanie again and again and again. Okay, so to him, the motive is completely, it makes total sense. So here's a couple of pictures of Ted. This was at his trial in Florida, and he just looks like a lawyer guy. I would imagine that if you guys passed Ted Bundy in the mall once again, you might think, oh, that's probably someone's dad. He's kind of handsome, and not give him a second thought. However, this is a very telling photograph, and this just happened to be snapped by a photographer that was in the courtroom during his trial. And so Ted had proposed a motion to the judge, and the judge had turned him down. And once again, here's the narcissism. How dare you? I'm the smartest, greatest lawyer in the world, even though I actually don't have a law degree. Was just a law student. But, how dare you? And he basically lost it in the courtroom, and this photographer happened to snap this photo. And so this is not the smiling, mild-mannered Ted that he liked to present to the media. So this is probably a glimpse into the person that his victim saw. This is rage-filled Ted that he managed to keep hidden. One of the things that was interesting and really sickening to me as a female and, a basically normal person, is that the courtroom was packed with women who were in love with Ted and who were there to support him, and they'd never met him. They just knew his image on the media. And these were college-educated women who just thought, there's no way he could have done it. He's just too cute. He may have done it, but he just, what he needs? He needs a good woman. And then he'll stop doing these horrible things. I mean, I can't even fathom that kind of thought pattern. But once again, they're charismatic, and so they can lure people in. Okay, now we head to the Midwest, where unfortunately, it seems like the Midwest, I don't know what's in the water out here, but we have our share of serial killers. So John Wayne Gacy murdered 33 young men and boys in Chicago in the 1970s as well. And what he did, and also this is part of his narcissism, he buried his victims in the crawl space under his house. Yeah, probably not a good plan. So access to his victims, this is how I've talked about this, how sex workers especially are really vulnerable. It was the same thing with Gacy's victims, because this was in the 1970s, okay? And he would target young, recently homeless gay men. So, there's certainly much more acceptance of gay people today. Obviously, hopefully it will still improve, but it was very rare for any parent in the 1970s to throw a coming out party and to embrace their children and march in a parade, I love my gay son. So unfortunately, a lot of these young men were thrown out of their homes because, we don't want a gay kid, or you are sick and evil. And they ended up on the street homeless, and a lot of them, to survive, had to resort to prostitution, and Gacy exploited that. So he would meet these young men and he'd say, oh man, I just feel really sorry for you. Why don't you come back to my house? You can take a shower, you can crash there. I'll give you a nice hot meal. And then once he was in their house, that's when he would prey on them. One of the creepiest things about Gacy, in my opinion, is that he also volunteered as a clown. And I don't know about your feelings about clowns. I think there are about 3 clowns in my life that I like, but I find him kind of scary. Okay, and he would go to childhood parties and the pediatric section of the hospital and make balloon animals and it creeped me out. In fact, when I lived in Chicago and was working at the crime lab, I was asked to give a talk on DNA at a local high school. And when I was finished, one of the teachers came over to me and she said, "I got to show you this." And it was a Polaroid picture from her 5th birthday party. And the clown that her parents had hired to entertain the kids was John Wayne Gacy. Oh my God. Okay, so John Wayne Gacy actually started his crime spree in Waterloo, Iowa. So he married a woman. His father-in-law owned a bunch of KFC franchises. And so he was hired to manage one of those franchises up in Waterloo. He then, basically groomed and then molested a few of his workers who were younger, teenage boys. He was arrested, tried, and convicted for that. And he served time in Anamosa State Penitentiary, which is just down the road from Cedar Rapids. So he actually started in Iowa. And after his time was up, then he moved back to Colorado, and that's when he started his murder spree. So once again, you see an escalation from sexual crimes up to sexual crimes plus homicide. So here is John Wayne Gacy as a clown. His clown's name was Pogo. And so I was at a party one time in Chicago, and I was chatting with this fella, and he goes, "Hey, I went to Barnum and Bailey Clown College," which I guess is a real thing. And it's where, clowns that work in like Cirque du Soleil, can get their training. It's like a performing arts college. And he was telling me that the way you can tell the difference between a friendly, good clown and an evil clown is how they apply their mouth makeup. And if you notice Pogo, his smile is very pointed. And that's the sign of an evil clown. So think of the Joker in Batman. It's the exact same thing. John Wayne Gacy was also a very loyal Democrat. Here he is with First Lady Rosalind Carter, who was the wife of President Jimmy Carter at the time. Ted Bundy was a Republican. We haven't had any serial killing independents, as far as I know, but they don't have any particular political affiliation. Their serial killers are totally bipartisan. The other thing that's interesting about John Wayne Gacy is he would supposedly paint portraits of himself as Pogo while he was imprisoned, and then he would sell them at huge profits. And so he is the reason now why there is a law that no person who's in prison can, sell something and then make a profit from it for themselves. It all goes into a fund for the victims. It's recently come out that Gacy maybe didn't even paint these portraits. He actually paid other inmates to do it who were more artistically talented than him. Who knows? But people were literally contacting him in prison and then paying thousands of dollars for a portrait of Pogo. And just to show you that, he's kind of not the only sicko. I'm sorry, I look terrible. I really got a shower today, I got to tell you what. But I actually have a John Wayne Gacy kind of refrigerator magnet. So, yeah, you can take his little head off here. So, I'm a terrible person too, all right? Fully admit it. Hey, Boji, come on. Boj, come on. Come on over here. Come on, buddy, come on. Boji, God. They listen to me about as well as you guys do. I bet Boji wouldn't sign up for Remind either. He'd say, forget it. Okay, I digress. So, still in the power-oriented subgroup. So here is Richard Ramirez, who he was known as the Night Stalker, and his murder spree was out in California. So, tortured and raped 25 victims, murdered 13. One thing about him, so he didn't have a set victim. his kind of like his MO was, I'm going to be able to jump off the interstate. And I think it was I-5. I'm not sure. I'm not that familiar with Los Angeles, their interstate system. But whatever major interstate runs right through Los Angeles and then goes northern, up through Northern California, he would get off an exit and he would attack someone really close to the exit so that he could jump back in his car and then get back on the interstate and be gone. Okay, so that was how he chose his victims. And in fact, in one case, he, raped and murdered a young mom and then also raped her 8-year-old son. So, there was no set victimology that the police could follow. He was also the one who, he loved to call himself a Satanist. Here, he would come out in the courtroom. You can see there's a pentagram on his palm. He just loved to feed into that. Interesting thing about how he was actually apprehended. So we've talked about databases, and one of them I mentioned, and you probably heard this on TV shows too, is AFIS, which is the Automated Fingerprint Identification System. So this had not been used yet. It was had been worked on in California, and it was set to go live. And so on pretty close to the day where it went live, there was a fingerprint that had been recovered at one of the scenes of the murder, I believe, or, very close to that scene. And it was searched through the system. And because he had prior offenses, up popped Richard Ramirez. And so the LAPD were putting out bulletins on the news that said, hey, we're looking for this person in connection to the Night Stalker murders. They probably called him a person of interest. Well, Richard Ramirez happened to be at like a convenience or liquor store in Los Angeles, and people saw this on the news, and he was surrounded. And it was actually the LAPD came in and actually saved his life, because people in Los Angeles by that time were like, we are just, we are over the Night Stalker. We want him caught. And so, yeah, the police actually saved his life from vigilante justice. I believe he just recently died in prison. All right, so we're up at 17 minutes. Gonna stop there. Gonna pick up in just a few minutes on mission-oriented serial killers. Okay, so we've completed one of the psychological types, which is power-oriented. Now, do I expect you to know all of the little, backstory and kind of nitpicky details about numbers of victims and things like that on an exam or a quiz? No, but if I gave you a list of serial killers' names, I would expect you to look in that and say, okay, which of these was a power-oriented serial killer? Okay, the answer would be B, Ted Bundy. So I want you to know the name of the serial killer and to which category they belong to. Okay, so I'm gonna get this uploading and start the other video in just a minute. Thank you.